Hi everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about how a hopeful D&D player almost gets swindled into paying a large sum of money in order to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons. A story about how a nuanced villain throws a D&D party for a loop, and much more. Now, today's video may be a bit shorter than you are used to, because as many of you know, my family is going through some stuff right now, but there will still be kitties. There we go. Now I think it's time for some DnD horror stories. I think this game might have been a pyramid scheme. By Reddit user Cal679. I've been looking for a new game recently, as both of my online groups disbanded due to Game Master burnout. The hunt for a new game has not been fruitful. I joined one game that didn't even make it to Session 0 before the Game Master dropped out, and another that keeps getting postponed and may just be a creative writing prompt for the Game Master. I joined the Pathfinder Discord and quickly found a game that seemed to be in my time zone and was beginner friendly. Great for me, as I've never played Pathfinder before. Yet another game that collapsed before Session 0. I send a message to the person that posted the ad. Let's just call them Sonic the Hedgehog. I can't remember the actual screen name. I said that I'm a Pathfinder newbie, but would be interested in joining the game. I get a response about 5 minutes later saying, "Thanks for your interest. I'm actually recruiting for a 5th edition game with high production value and lots of in-depth role-playing. Let me know if you're still interested." It seemed odd that they were hiding an ad for a 5th edition game in the Pathfinder Discord, but whatever. I was also interested in getting into a 5th edition game, so I agreed. They sent me a link to the Discord server for the game, and they gave very specific instructions that I was to speak to the mod and, quote, "Tell them Sonic the Hedgehog sent you. Make sure you give my full screen name and check that the spelling is right. In fact, just copy and paste it so you don't mess up the spelling." I get into the Discord server, and the first thing I notice is that there's only one other user, the mod, and most of the campaign notes and background info read like they were AI generated. They also had very strict rules about what can be said in or out of character. Basically, it's forbidden to speak to any of the other players out of character, and any questions about game logistics are strictly only between you and the mod. Starting to feel like something's off, but maybe they're just really into immersion, and maybe the real server is elsewhere once you get past the interview stage. I set up a call for an interview with the mod and GM. This takes a bit of negotiating because I'm in the UK on GMT, which the original Pathfinder ad had as its time zone, and the mod is based in California. But it turns out our working hours fit despite the time zone, so that's a plus, I guess. We get into the call and start chatting. I ask some of the standard questions, like what tone the game will have. Will it be more roleplay or more combat-based? Are there any classes or races that are off limits, etc.? But the mod is being very cagey and not giving straight answers to anything. After about 15 minutes, he brings up that this is actually a paid game. That's not what I expected. It wasn't mentioned in the ad, and isn't really what I'm looking for. However, I'd heard of some games with very high production value and resources where there was a buy-in of maybe $5 to $15. Maybe I could be persuaded if the game sounds good enough. Then he drops the price on me. $80 frickin' dollars. I think I must have gasped because he starts scrambling and trying to keep me on the hook. "That's not $80 per week. We're not ridiculous. It's just $80 per month." $80 per month. Maybe I'm just a cheapskate, and maybe this is a really common and fair price for a game of D&D. But I just laughed my ass off and hung up the call. I went to check the exchange rate, in case I'd missed some news about the dollar rapidly depreciating. But no, they were asking for £60 per month for a game that would be played over Discord, if it would even be played at all. That's more than I pay for all the streaming services I use combined. It was only afterwards that I supposed it was maybe just a scam to get gullible nerds from a different country to send them money. Holy crap. I can understand that there are paid games out there, but $80 a month? If you only play once a week, that's like $20 per game, per player. That is a bit steep, even if the game has high production value and a really good DM. But this was to be a D&D game, meant to be played on Discord. Plus, if it was a paid game, that should have been advertised in the Discord posting, along with it being D&D 5th edition, and not Pathfinder. Perhaps that is why there were no other players in the game's Discord, because all the other potential players had the same reaction to the price as OP did. Or who knows, perhaps it was just a scam. Either way, it was probably good that OP noped out of there. Let's move on to the next post. When the party wanted a more nuanced villain than your typical Dark Lord. By Reddit user RealisticLime7534. So, the party my friend is DMing decided it was time for something new with the BBEG. They were tired of the typical, comically evil, pale, slender wizards, and wanted something more nuanced. The DM listened to them and decided that in the current session, they would be fighting the mysterious Mistress of the Eternal Light, who was once a noble advisor to the king, but for reasons unknown, decided to go rogue. She has already slaughtered numerous villages and plans to commit genocide on more. The king's spymaster hires the party to find and defeat her. So the party knows their enemy, or maybe not. Along the way, they meet a kind, beautiful, and brave sorceress named Solari, whose previous party was murdered by the Mistress of Eternal Light. She wants to join the party to avenge her companions and help defeat the Mistress of Eternal Light. The party accepts her offer and continues their journey. Solari says that she knows the location of the bandit camps hired by the Mistress of Eternal Light. Strangely, the camps consist not only of bandits in rags, but also of heavily armored soldiers. The party doesn't suspect anything and starts to adore her because she is A. beautiful, resembling a fantasy version of Marilyn Monroe, and B. greatly helpful in fights. However, throughout the journey, Solari starts showing hints that she might be hiding something, but the party thinks she has the right to keep her secrets. Only the monk suspects something, but at worst, he thinks she is the Mistress of Eternal Light's daughter, or a relative of some kind. Then comes the culmination. At some point, Solari reveals that she is, in fact, the Mistress of Eternal Light. To say the party was shocked is an understatement. Some were angry, some were stunned, and some couldn't believe what she said. She also reveals that they didn't slaughter bandits in those camps, but rather the army of the king she previously served. She explains that the king's court was spreading corruption that poisoned the entire kingdom. Civil wars were not uncommon in the kingdom, and Solari realized that the aristocrats had to be purged, and the king must become an absolute monarch who couldn't be blackmailed or manipulated. But when the king heard of her idea, he was enraged, called her a mad witch, and banished her from the kingdom. Because of her flawless work as an advisor, the king didn't put her on the kill list. Even though she was banished, she couldn't leave the kingdom. In danger from the court, she knew what to do, and began killing the aristocrats to save the king from their influence. Some of them were the king's close and distant relatives. When she ravaged castles and villages, she called herself the Mistress of the Eternal Light. After she explained this, the party was furious. They claimed to the DM that she couldn't be evil, and that she just wanted to save the kingdom. That sometimes hard choices are necessary for the greater good. That she is too complex to be evil. Oh, and also, she's so hot. Some of them even wanted to join the BBEG in her quest to, quote, save the kingdom from the aristocrats. To say the DM's eyes weren't twitching is an understatement. TLDR. The party wanted a more nuanced BBEG, and the DM agreed and delivered. The King's Spy Master hired them to defeat the Mistress of Eternal Light. The party then met a beautiful sorceress named Solari and decided to travel with her, not knowing that she was actually the BBEG. When they found out and she explained her motivation, quote, saving the kingdom, they were furious and insisted that she couldn't be evil because she had a noble goal, and because she was hot. Well, the players did ask for a more nuanced villain to go up against, and I would say that a wizard that hid her identity in order to travel with the party and have them help her dispose of her enemies before revealing that she was indeed who they were after is a pretty good way to do that. The only problem is, the players that wanted something besides the black and white, good versus evil, couldn't seem to figure out how to deal with it, and couldn't decide what to do, with some even wanting to join up with her. So maybe the Dungeon Master did the nuanced villain thing a bit too well. I just wonder what happened next, and I'll be sure to keep an eye out for any updates on that game. On to the next post. Dungeon Master only gives cursed items. Abandons campaign when we stop picking them up. By Reddit user, Mediocre Local 5 Guys. This was some years ago in 4th edition. We were running a campaign mostly through the Underdark, with 4 players and the Dungeon Master, around level 8 to 10. Overall, the campaign was good. However, the distribution of magic items was not. The Dungeon Master had a fixation on making any magic item dropped to be cursed, and not mild curses. Debilitating and deadly ones were what they liked. Our first item was an axe. When our teammate picked it up, he had to roll a will saving throw with a DC beyond what a 20 would grant. When he failed, he immediately began attacking his teammates in a bloodthirsty rage. He was immune to all status effects, as we found out when attempting to paralyze and sleep him. There was no save and no solution. We were only able to get him to stop attacking after killing the player, as even his unconscious body would fight us. The next item was a small ring in an unassuming chest, buried with a chest in a rock on a small underground island. Activating the ring turned you to stone permanently. I should also mention that we didn't have a cleric with us, but I don't remember how easily they can deal with status effects in 4th edition. Our last item was an amulet I was forced to activate via a will save. It summoned a skeleton that immediately turned around and attacked me. It wasn't very dangerous, so we experimented a bit. It wasn't useful in combat, because as best as we could figure, all the amulet did was summon the skeleton that attacked the person who summoned it. At this point, we stopped picking up items. We had so far not found anything that was a net boon for our group. All the items we found seemed to want to kill us in some way. So we as a group opted not to take any more items from this cursed place. So we bypassed several items, with the Dungeon Master even going out of his way to describe their opulence and the divine wonder of one, a chalice. But we would not have it. Careful, boys. The more extravagant the item, the more horrible the curse. A halberd, a magic book, suits of armor, all radiating magic, all ignored. After about 3 or 4 sessions, the Dungeon Master began canceling on us, sometimes the day of. After a month, we began asking about the campaign. He informed us that he would no longer be Dungeon Mastering for us, because none of us were interested in the world he had crafted, despite the fact that we enjoyed everything besides the cursed items. But that was not good enough. By passing on his cursed items, and he did eventually admit that all of the other items were absolutely cursed, as he couldn't help but share a couple, we were obviously not interested in anything about his campaign, and he stopped running it. Even now, when I share details about the campaign that I'm currently running, He always feels that I could spice it up with a couple of cursed items for the players, like a two-handed axe that fuses with your hands so you can do nothing with them besides hack and chop. Well, what did that DM expect? You can only do something like that so many times in a row before the players and their characters would avoid anything magical. To end the game just because they didn't want to pick up items anymore is a bit childish, even when you consider that the DM ended up telling them that the items that they passed up on were indeed also cursed. I mean, cursed items in D&D can be fun and all, but you gotta give the players some magic items that won't make playing the game a bad experience for them. Thankfully, it sounds like OP took up the mantle of DM, and isn't as cursed item happy as his previous DM, now made a player. Let's move on to today's final story. If your dungeon master ever asks if you're wearing gloves, always say yes. By Reddit user, Confused Squeezle. Once upon a long ago, in a time where D&D players had to understand a thing called THAC0, and lower AC scores were dope, a group of friends had decided to sit around a table and roll some dice and tell some stories. It had taken me a long time to roll up a character. I didn't yet know the rules, and I had to borrow a copy of the player's handbook. It must have taken poor little old me, with my undiagnosed ADHD, the better part of a week to create Davis, the light-hearted, wisecracking, high-elven rogue, whose purpose in life was to find fame, glory, and learn the ins and outs of dungeon delving, as well as overcome the stigma of his mixed heritage. I was in love with this character. He always knew what to say, how to interact with people, how to handle the various dangers associated with venturing forth into those dark places wherein monsters call home. I show up a little late for our first session, so I was apologetic. The group of adventurers had already found their way into a dungeon and were delving through the Stygian depths. It would take about 40 minutes to get around to me. Davis finds his way to a side entrance, a door in a rock wall, as the sun fell beyond the western horizon. Davis tries to open the door, and I hear a die clatter on the other side of the DM screen. DM: "The door appears to be locked. What do you do?" Me: "I pick the lock." I give him the open lock roll. DM: "You succeed." Me: "I enter the dungeon." DM: "Are you wearing gloves?" Me: "No." DM: "As you begin to travel down the hallway, you can hear the echoing voices of the adventurers whom you're on your way to meet. A wave of dizziness grips you as you lose consciousness. You die a foolish death." Me: "WTF?" DM: "Contact poison on the doorknob. Roll up a new character." I am inconsolable, and I spend the rest of the session holding back hot angry tears and wishing that something eldritch would eat this guy. It's a miracle that I came back for another session at all. I like to think that I'm a pretty good sport about things. However, this MFer just killed my first D&D character in my first 5 minutes of my first game. For years after, I really tried to like this guy because he was tight with some of the other players at this table. And one day, years later, I hear that the lady I like is going out with him. I would say that she was, and is, my best friend and favorite person. To be honest, to say I've got it bad for her wouldn't be a stretch, though I do my best to be happy for her. They go on and get married. He is a trash person to her. Then they get divorced. She gives me a call. We start to date, get hitched, and totally agree that that guy is the worst. Well, that certainly was a roller coaster of a story, huh? For the Dungeon Master to do that to OP's first character in his first game of D&D in the first 5 minutes was a bit overkill if you ask me. Perhaps the DM was mad that OP was late and thought that this was a way to get back at him. But as it sounds, OP had the last laugh in the end there. Just goes to show that sometimes these stories can have happy endings. And speaking of endings, that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.